It all began with a seashell, a gift from a woman who had once worked in my grandfather's house, a woman who everyone whispered wasn't quite normal. She was old, frail, mostly kept to herself. But her eyes, those piercing eyes, they always seemed to linger too long, as if she saw things the rest of us couldn't. One day, as she was leaving our home for good, she handed me the seashell. Her hands shook slightly as she pressed it into mine. She smiled. No, not a smile. It was something else. Something almost sad. "Keep this safe, child," she said. Her voice was soft, but there was weight behind it. "It will protect you, even when I cannot." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I mean, it was just a shell, right? Beautiful, sure. Its surface shimmered faintly, like it held some kind of secret. But still, just a shell. Or so I thought. That night, the dreams began. I was trapped in darkness. Shadows swirled around me, alive and suffocating. And then, from the center of the blackness, a figure emerged. A woman. She was holding something. A baby. But the baby wasn't crying. It wasn't moving. It was wrapped in cloth, bright red cloth, so red it looked like it had been soaked in blood. The woman stepped closer, closer. Her face blurred, impossible to see, yet somehow I knew she was staring at me. She stretched out her arms, forcing the baby toward me. Her voice echoed in my head, hollow, distorted. "Take it," she said. "Take the child." I couldn't move. My hands, trembling, started to reach out. But just before I touched the baby, I'd wake up, every night, the same dream, the same figure, the same unbearable feeling that someone was watching me. Then, one night, it changed. The old woman, the one who had given me the shell, she appeared in my dream. She stood between me and the figure, her frail frame somehow strong. Her arms stretched wide, shielding me. Her voice was soft but firm. "Leave her alone," she said. "She is under my protection." The figure with the baby hesitated. For the first time, it seemed unsure. And then, it vanished. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding. The room was freezing, even though it was the middle of summer. I reached for the shell, the only thing that gave me comfort. But when I touched it, it was warm. No, hot, burning hot. And then I heard it. Crack. I froze. Crack. Another sound. Then another. The shell in my hands was breaking, splitting apart. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stared as it shattered completely. And then I heard her voice, faint, almost a whisper. "Goodbye, child. It is done." The next morning, I found out the woman had died. That very night. I don't know what she saved me from, but sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent, I feel it, a presence, watching, waiting, and I wonder, without her protection, how long can I really stay safe? Growing up, my little brother and I shared everything. A room, an Xbox, even the same cell phone for a few years. Never in my life did I think we would share the same nightmare. This was way back in 2013. I remember it clearly because I was excited to see Iron Man 3. The movie turned out to be a disappointment, but it was still fun to see all the different suits. Anyway, we ended up passing out late that night after a few rounds of Call of Duty. That's when I had one of the scariest nightmares of my life. I remember being in my bed, lying there, unable to move. My chest was heavy. My head was turned towards my little brother's bed, and that's when I saw it. A figure, creeping over my brother's sleeping body. It was tall, thin, completely cloaked in a Grim Reaper-type robe. Its back was facing me, but I could hear it breathing, deep, slow breaths, as it reached a shadowy, clawed hand toward my brother's face. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My heart pounded as it reached out and picked him up, still fast asleep. I struggled, tried to move, but it felt like an elephant was pressing down on my chest. The creature straightened its back and stood up, holding my brother in its arms. It turned to face me, and I froze. Its face, it was there, and it wasn't. A constantly shifting shadow, like a silk cloth with frayed edges. The edges flickered like flames, but there was no light. It stared down at me and whispered something I couldn't hear. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I watched it turn and walk into the wall, vanishing from sight, still holding my brother. I tried, with every ounce of strength I had, to get up, but it was like all my energy had been sucked away. I squeezed my eyes shut, and then I woke up. Sweat covered my body. I sat up immediately and looked over at my brother's bed. He was still asleep. My heart was racing, my hands trembling as I paced around, popping my knuckles, trying to make sense of what I just dreamt. I wiped my sweaty palms on my boxers and grabbed my towel, heading for the bathroom. Just as I was about to step out, my brother sat up. He looked at me with a worn-out, exhausted expression. "Hey, man," I said, forcing a smile. "Glad you're okay. I just had the most fucked-up dream about you." He looked at me, eyes wide, a mixture of fear and exhaustion in them. "I had a fucked-up dream too," he said, his voice shaking. "Some monster thing kidnapped me, and I couldn't move. You didn't do anything, just cried and went back to sleep." I froze, my heart stopping. Did he? Did we have the same dream? I swallowed hard and asked, "Did the monster look like the Grim Reaper, with a weird shadow face?" The look on his face was one I'll never forget. His eyes went wide. He nodded. "Yeah. Did you see it too?" I nodded back and told him everything. We had the same dream, the same details, just from different points of view. To this day, we have no idea how we shared that dream, or what that sinister shadow figure was. I still think about that dream. I can still picture its face. That void of a face.